Lyra Veyari stood at the edge of the great terrace, her eyes scanning the horizon. The sky of Lithoris glowed with a soft amber hue, the twin suns low and casting long shadows across the vast gardens below. She adjusted the folds of her ceremonial robe, feeling the weight of her lineage press against her shoulders. Her family had served the Veyari Council for generations, and now she had been chosen to unite her world with another, through a marriage she had never wanted. Humans, or Terrans as her people called them, were rare visitors to Lithoris. Tales of their unpredictability and raw strength had circulated for centuries. Lyra had grown up hearing stories of their fearless nature, their disregard for protocol, and the power they wielded without thought. She had always been taught to be wary, to respect them, but never to trust them. And yet tomorrow she would meet one. She had no choice. Tradition demanded it. The Terran, Captain Elias Kane, had been sent as an ambassador from the Terran Confederation. His role was to cement peace between their worlds, and she was to be the bridge. But as much as she tried to calm her mind, a knot of unease twisted in her stomach. A soft breeze carried the scent of the native Lithoris blooms, heavy and sweet, but even that could not chase away the worry in her heart. She had read Elias' dossier, a tall man, disciplined, known for his diplomacy and courage. But the words on a page could never convey the presence of a living, breathing human. What if he did not respect her? What if he saw her as weak or fragile? What if he expected obedience before earning trust? Her thoughts were interrupted by a distant hum. The sound grew louder, mechanical, and steady until a sleek ship descended from the sky. Its polished hull reflected the golden light, a strange but beautiful contrast to the organic world below. Lyra's heart quickened. That ship carried him, the Terran she feared, the man she was compelled to wed. When the ramp lowered, Elias stepped forward. He moved with confidence, but there was a calmness in his posture that set him apart from the stories she had heard. His gaze swept over the terrace, and when it landed on her, he gave a respectful bow. Not exaggerated, not theatrical, but genuine. Lyra stiffened. She had expected a show of strength, a boastful display, but this was different. He approached slowly, giving her space. "Lyra Veyari," he said in her language, careful, precise. "It is an honor to meet you." His voice was steady, without arrogance, yet filled with warmth. Lyra inclined her head, unsure how to respond. Words felt inadequate, clumsy. She had rehearsed her greeting many times, imagining every possible outcome, but now that he was here, standing before her, all preparation seemed meaningless. "You speak our tongue well," she said finally, her voice soft but tinged with curiosity. "I have studied," he replied. "I want to understand your people, your world." There was no false flattery in his tone. He truly meant it, and that simple honesty made her heart flutter with something she did not yet recognize: hope. The first few minutes passed in silence, filled only with the faint rustle of leaves and the distant calls of native wildlife. Lyra's mind raced with questions. What would it be like to live alongside a Terran? Could she ever feel safe around someone whose species was legendary for power and unpredictability? Elias spoke again, his words measured. "I know that this union is arranged, that you may not wish it. I only ask that we meet with honesty and patience. I wish to learn from you, not to impose myself." "Then we shall begin cautiously," she said, her voice steadier now. "But know this, I will not be swayed by words alone." Elias listened with genuine interest, asking thoughtful questions that revealed his curiosity and intelligence. He did not interrupt, he did not correct, he simply absorbed everything she shared. At one point, a small creature, native to the gardens, with delicate wings and iridescent scales, darted near them. Lyra instinctively stepped back, but Elias reached out carefully and guided it away from danger. "Your world is remarkable," he said softly. "I have never seen anything like this." As the sun dipped lower, casting longer shadows, they reached the edge of the terrace, overlooking a valley carved by centuries of natural erosion. The view was breathtaking, but Lyra felt a twinge of unease. The valley symbolized the unknown, the vast future that lay ahead of her, intertwined with this human she barely knew. "You are quiet," Elias observed, noticing her tension. "I can sense concern, perhaps fear. I do not wish to frighten you further. It can teach us caution, patience, and understanding." Night fell and the terrace lights flickered on, illuminating the pathway with soft, amber glows. They continued walking, speaking quietly of traditions, responsibilities, and the weight of duty. Every so often, Lyra caught herself watching him, noticing small details, the careful way he listened, the respect in his gestures, the patience in his tone. By the time they returned to the hall, the tension in Lyra's chest had eased slightly. Fear had not vanished, but it had shifted. It was no longer the sharp, paralyzing fear of legend and rumor. It was cautious curiosity, a budding awareness that perhaps not all humans were what she had been taught to dread. Elias paused at the hall entrance. "Tomorrow will bring many eyes upon us," he said. "But tonight I hope you can see that my intentions are sincere. I seek understanding, not control. I seek partnership, not dominance." That night, Lyra lay in her chamber, listening to the quiet hum of the city beyond her window. She thought of Elias and the strange mixture of strength and gentleness she had seen. The knot in her stomach had not fully disappeared, but it had loosened, and for the first time, she allowed herself to imagine a future where she might not only survive alongside a human, but perhaps even feel safe. As the twin moons rose over Lithoris, bathing the world in silver light, Lyra realized that fear could be tempered by understanding. She had been compelled to meet this Terran, to wed him by duty, yet something had shifted. The first seed of trust had been planted, small and delicate, but full of potential. And for the first time in her life, she wondered if the stories of Terrans were incomplete, if the legends that had filled her mind with dread did not tell the whole truth. Tomorrow, she would face him again. But tonight, in the quiet of her chamber, she allowed herself to breathe. She allowed herself to hope that perhaps, just perhaps, she had found someone who could challenge her fear with kindness, strength, and understanding. The galaxy was vast and uncertain, but for the first time, Lyra felt that maybe, amidst all the unknowns, she could find safety in the presence of a human. The next morning, Lyra woke to the soft light of Lithoris filtering through the wide, curved windows of her chamber. The twin suns were higher now, casting warm patterns across the polished floors. Her mind, however, was restless. Thoughts of Elias lingered from the previous evening. She had begun to see a side of him that the stories had never told, a careful, respectful, and intelligent human. Yet unease remained. How could she trust someone whose people were so different, so unpredictable? The halls of the council palace were already alive with movement when she arrived for the morning sessions. Veyari attendants, dressed in flowing robes of muted colors, moved with quiet precision, preparing for the arrival of the Terran ambassador. Lyra adjusted her own robe and inhaled slowly, trying to calm the nervous flutter in her chest. Today would be different. Today, she reminded herself, she had to observe him more closely, to understand him beyond mere appearances. Elias arrived shortly after her, escorted by a small contingent of Terran guards. Even from a distance, Lyra noticed the difference between their presence and that of Veyari attendants. The humans moved with a subtle confidence, their motions economical yet deliberate. Elias' gaze met hers briefly, and he gave a small, polite nod before turning his attention to the attendants and the schedules. He seemed calm, composed, yet she could sense the awareness beneath his surface, a quiet alertness that spoke of experience and intelligence. The day began with lessons in ceremonial etiquette, designed to prepare them both for the upcoming diplomatic functions. Lyra demonstrated the proper gestures, the precise manner of greeting, the intricate sequence of bows and inclinations unique to her people. Elias followed carefully, his movements deliberate, his eyes focused on her instructions. "Do not rush," Lyra said, her voice firm but not unkind. "Each movement has meaning. A mistake can cause offense. I want to honor your customs correctly." His tone was calm, almost meditative. Lyra observed him closely. He had no trace of arrogance, no desire to mimic or impress. He simply wanted to learn. Hours passed in this quiet study, punctuated by occasional pauses where Elias asked questions. Some were practical, about the order of movements or the significance of gestures. Others were thoughtful, seeking to understand the cultural values behind the rituals. Lyra found herself surprised at his insight. He was not merely copying her actions. He was attempting to grasp their meaning, to respect the intentions behind them. During a brief break, they walked through the inner gardens. The air was filled with the scent of blooming plants, and soft sunlight filtered through the translucent leaves above. Lyra's tension eased slightly. For the first time, she noticed that Elias moved with care, his presence unobtrusive yet steady. He did not dominate the space or demand attention. Instead, he seemed attuned to the world around him, noticing details that many Veyari might overlook. "Your world is beautiful," he said quietly, gesturing to a flowering vine that climbed along the archway. "I have never seen anything like it. And I want to understand it, if you allow me." Elias learned the proper posture, the gestures, and the sequence of ceremonial words. At first, Lyra's eyes narrowed at his careful attention. Humans were often impatient, she had been told. But Elias proved patient beyond measure, repeating movements until they flowed naturally, correcting himself with quiet diligence. As the sun began to set, they moved to the council chambers for a discussion on diplomacy. Lyra expected this session to be formal and tense. Veyari councils were known for their strict protocols and rigid discussions, often leaving little room for personal thought. Elias, however, surprised her again. He listened carefully as Lyra presented the protocols and their importance. When it was his turn to speak, he asked questions not to challenge, but to clarify. He inquired about the values behind the laws, the principles that guided their decisions, and the customs that governed social interactions. His questions were insightful, showing an understanding that went beyond surface-level knowledge. Lyra felt a shift within herself. She had feared that humans would be crude, impatient, or domineering. Yet Elias demonstrated thoughtfulness, respect, and intelligence. He was not simply a representative of his species. He was an individual capable of learning, adapting, and understanding. During a break, a minor incident occurred. A visiting dignitary misstepped during a ceremonial bow, nearly causing offense. The room tensed immediately, anticipating conflict. Lyra braced herself for the usual human reaction, anger, dismissal, or force. But Elias intervened calmly, using words and gestures to diffuse the situation. He acknowledged the mistake, offered a solution, and preserved both respect and dignity for the dignitary. Lyra watched, astonished. His approach was neither aggressive nor submissive. It was clever, precise, and effective. She realized then that humans were not defined by brute strength alone. They possessed creativity, adaptability, and a sense of fairness that could rival even the most disciplined Veyari traditions. After the incident, they returned to the gardens. The air had cooled, and the first stars of Lithoris's night sky appeared. Elias stood quietly beside her, observing the constellations. "Do you see those two stars?" he asked. "Your people call them the twin guardians. I think your people and mine share more than I expected." They spoke little, allowing silence to settle comfortably between them. Lyra felt an unfamiliar sense of ease in his presence. There was safety in the steadiness of his steps, in the careful attention he gave to the path ahead, and in the quiet respect he showed for her world. When they reached her chamber, she hesitated. Trust was not something she could grant lightly. Yet she sensed something genuine in Elias, a sincerity that demanded acknowledgement. "Tomorrow will be another day of learning," he said softly. "I hope it will also be a day of understanding." It was no longer a sharp, binding force. It was cautious, measured, and tinged with curiosity. She had begun to see Elias not as a threat, but as an ally, someone whose presence could be trusted, someone whose mind and heart were capable of bridging the vast differences between their species. Lying in bed, she thought of the day's events, the lessons, the questions, the incident in the council, and the quiet moments in the gardens. Each encounter had chipped away at her preconceptions, revealing a human who was more than legend, more than rumor. He was an individual capable of kindness, intelligence, and understanding. Lyra felt a small spark of hope. Perhaps the future would not be as frightening as she had imagined. Perhaps she could learn to trust, and perhaps she could even come to feel safe. The twin moons shone brightly through her window, casting a gentle silver light over her chamber. Lyra closed her eyes, allowing herself to breathe, to reflect, and to wonder. She had been compelled to meet this human, to wed him by duty, yet the first threads of choice were forming in her mind. She could choose to observe, to understand, and perhaps, in time, to trust. For the first time, Lyra allowed herself to imagine a future where fear did not dominate her every thought. She imagined conversations with Elias, shared walks in the gardens, moments of quiet understanding, and the possibility of safety in his presence. Tomorrow, the lessons would continue, and the path ahead remained uncertain. But tonight, she felt a sense of calm she had never known before. She realized that humans, despite their differences, could embody qualities that her people valued deeply: patience, insight, and respect. And in that realization, a seed of hope took root, a hope that the Terran she had feared might one day become someone she could not only respect but rely upon. The galaxy was vast, full of mysteries and dangers, yet in the quiet of her chamber, Lyra Veyari felt the first glimmer of understanding, the first hint that perhaps, amidst all the unknowns, she could find not only duty but safety, trust, and even the faint beginnings of friendship. The sun had barely risen over Lithoris when Lyra awoke to the distant roar of engines echoing across the valley. She sat up in her chamber, heart pounding. Something was wrong. The morning air was usually calm, filled only with the soft hum of native insects and the whisper of leaves in the wind. Today, the sound was sharp and insistent, mechanical, foreign. Within moments her attendants arrived, their faces pale with worry. "Lady Lyra," one of them said, voice trembling. "There are reports of an attack on the outer diplomatic convoy. The Terran delegation may be in danger." Without waiting for instructions, she made her way to the transport bay where the Terran ship had landed just yesterday. Elias was already there, calm yet alert, assessing the situation with his characteristic focus. His eyes met hers briefly, and she caught a flash of relief in his expression. "Lyra," he said, nodding once, "I am glad you are here. We may need your guidance." "They are faster than expected," Elias noted, scanning the horizon. "But they are not organized. If we plan carefully, we can protect the convoy." And now, standing beside Elias, she realized she was not entirely powerless. Together, they devised a plan. Elias listened to her suggestions, valuing her knowledge of the terrain. She pointed out narrow passages, hidden alcoves, and natural choke points that could be used to slow or redirect the attackers. Elias considered each idea carefully, adding his own strategies that made use of Terran technology: drones for surveillance, force fields for protection, and careful positioning to protect both civilians and diplomats. As they prepared to descend to the valley, Lyra's fear had not vanished, but it had transformed into focus. She was no longer a passive observer. She was a participant, a strategist, and unexpectedly, a partner. The convoy moved slowly along the winding paths, the hum of engines blending with the soft rush of Lithoris winds. Suddenly, a barrage of energy blasts erupted from the cliffs above, forcing the vehicles to swerve. Lyra's heart leapt. Raiders. The attack was sudden and aggressive. Elias reacted immediately. He directed the Terran guards to cover the most exposed vehicles while coordinating with Lyra to guide the convoy along safer routes. "Keep moving," he shouted, his voice firm but not panicked. "Use the terrain to your advantage. Lead the way." At every turn, he checked on her, ensuring she remained safe, and she began to feel a strange sense of trust growing in the rhythm of their cooperation. The raiders pursued, but their attacks became less effective as the convoy moved into the gorge. Energy blasts struck the walls, ricocheting harmlessly, while Terran shields absorbed much of the damage. Lyra could see the frustration in the attackers' movements. They had underestimated the humans' ingenuity and her own guidance. At one point, a raider attempted to block the path with a fallen boulder. Lyra froze for a second, panic rising, but Elias reacted instantly. Using a small portable device, he detonated a controlled charge that broke the obstruction without harming the surrounding area. Lyra watched, amazed. His solution was precise, careful, and effective. He had neutralized the threat without unnecessary force. As they continued, Lyra began to see humans in a new light. They were not reckless or careless, as her childhood stories had suggested. Elias had strength, yes, but it was tempered with intelligence, creativity, and restraint. He was not merely a soldier or a warrior. He was a protector, someone who could think and act quickly while preserving life and dignity. The convoy finally reached a plateau overlooking the valley floor, where the raiders had gathered for a final push. Lyra felt a shiver of fear, but Elias' calm presence beside her steadied her. He turned to her, his eyes meeting hers with unwavering focus. "Are you ready?" he asked. Lyra nodded. "We can do this." When the raiders charged, they met a wall of strategy and coordination. Their attacks, though fierce, were countered at every turn. Lyra found herself shouting instructions, pointing out ambush points, and moving with a confidence she had never known. Beside her, Elias worked seamlessly, his mind and body in perfect sync with the plan they had created together. One of the raiders attempted to strike at Lyra directly, thinking to exploit her inexperience. But Elias intercepted with precise timing, using both strength and a non-lethal stun device to neutralize the threat. He did not scold or belittle her. Instead, he simply ensured her safety and returned to the strategy at hand. By the end of the encounter, the raiders were either captured or driven off. The convoy had suffered no significant losses, thanks to the combined efforts of human ingenuity and Veyari knowledge. Lyra's chest heaved with relief and exhilaration. She had faced danger, worked alongside a human, and survived, not by luck but through teamwork, intelligence, and trust. As they regrouped, Elias turned to her. "You did well," he said, his voice calm but sincere. "Your guidance was essential. Without it, the outcome could have been very different. But I hope you see now that strength is not only in power, It is in judgment, patience, and respect. She had seen the truth firsthand. Humans could be courageous without being reckless, strong without being cruel, and intelligent without being arrogant. The remainder of the day was spent tending to the convoy, repairing minor damage, and ensuring all personnel were accounted for. Lyra remained close to Elias, observing his actions, noting his decisions, and recognizing a growing admiration in her chest. It was no longer fear alone that defined her thoughts. It was a cautious respect, a recognition of his abilities, and a newfound trust. By the time the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky with shades of amber and violet, Lyra felt exhausted but alive. She had faced danger and survived, not as a passive noblewoman but as an active participant, working alongside a human who had proven himself worthy of her trust. That evening, as they returned to the council palace, the weight of tradition and duty still pressed upon her, but it felt lighter. Elias had shown her that humans could embody qualities she had long valued: intelligence, courage, empathy, and restraint. He had shown her that fear could be tempered by experience, that distrust could give way to partnership, and that strength could be measured not only in power but in wisdom. Lyra retired to her chamber, her mind replaying the day's events. She thought of the raiders, the narrow escapes, and the careful coordination that had saved lives. She thought of Elias, calm, capable, and respectful, and for the first time she allowed herself to imagine what the future might hold, not as a fearful obligation, but as a partnership built on trust and understanding. As she lay down, the twin moons of Lithoris cast their silver light across the room. Lyra closed her eyes, letting exhaustion and relief wash over her. She had survived the day's challenges, not alone, but with a human by her side who had proven himself worthy of respect and trust. And in that realization, a quiet thought formed in her mind. Perhaps the legends of humans were incomplete, perhaps even wrong. Perhaps humans, in their own way, could be allies, protectors, and friends. And perhaps, just perhaps, Elias Kane was one of the best examples of that truth. For the first time in her life, Lyra felt a sense of safety, not absolute, not without caution, but real, tangible, and grounded in experience. The galaxy remained vast, full of uncertainty and danger, yet tonight, she felt a quiet reassurance that, with the right human by her side, she could face whatever challenges awaited. And for the first time, Lyra allowed herself to hope. The morning after the convoy's attack, Lyra woke feeling unusually calm. The adrenaline of yesterday had faded, leaving a sense of quiet awareness in its place. She dressed quickly, the flowing robes of her family moving easily as she prepared to meet Elias. He was already in the garden courtyard when she arrived, examining the plants with careful attention. He lifted a delicate blossom, turning it over in his hands before gently placing it back on its stem. His attention to detail, his respect for the world around him, never ceased to amaze her. "Good morning, Lyra," he said, noticing her presence. His voice was soft but clear, carrying a warmth that made her chest tighten slightly. "Good morning, Captain Kane," she replied, inclining her head. She had long ago realized that formalities were necessary, but his tone, always calm and unassuming, made her wish she could speak more naturally. "Are you well?" he asked, observing her carefully. Lyra hesitated. "I am better than I expected." Her eyes flicked to the distant mountains where the sun painted the peaks with gold. "Yesterday was difficult, but I survived and so did others." Praise from her own people was expected. Recognition from him, a human she had once feared, felt different. It was sincere, honest, and unassuming, yet it reached deep into her heart. They spent the morning walking through the gardens, discussing matters of diplomacy, customs, and even small personal details about their lives. Lyra spoke of her childhood, her training in the arts of negotiation and combat, and the values that her people held dear. Elias listened, occasionally nodding, occasionally asking questions, not to test her but to understand. "I did not know your world had such complex traditions," he said, genuinely impressed. "Your people have built not only a society, but a system of thought that values wisdom and patience above all. Terrans have rules too, but sometimes we act first and consider later. I see now that there is strength in your caution." She explained how the Veyari harvested certain plants for medicine and sustenance, and how every creature, even the smallest insect, had its role in the ecosystem. Elias asked questions, not idle or trivial, but thoughtful, seeking to understand the relationships and systems that sustained life here. He experimented carefully, observing plants without harming them, noting patterns, and making careful deductions about the balance of the environment. Lyra watched him, increasingly aware of the patience and intelligence in his actions. At one point, a sudden shift in the weather sent a chill through the grove. Dark clouds rolled in unexpectedly and wind tore at the branches. Lyra's first instinct was to find shelter, but she realized that some of the smaller plants they had been examining were at risk. Without hesitation, she began to carefully protect them, moving quickly yet deliberately. Elias noticed and stepped beside her. "I will help," he said. Together, they worked in silence, covering the delicate vegetation with protective sheaths and redirecting streams of water away from vulnerable roots. In that moment, Lyra realized something remarkable. She did not feel fear with him. She did not feel the tension she had carried since the moment they met. There was a strange, comforting steadiness in his presence, an assurance that he would not let harm come to her or the world she cared for. When the storm passed, they emerged into the calm afternoon sunlight, the grove sparkling with droplets from the brief rain. Lyra's chest rose and fell with relief, and she turned to Elias. "Thank you," she said simply, "for helping." The remainder of the day continued with lessons in strategy and diplomacy, interspersed with moments of quiet observation. Lyra found herself speaking more freely, asking questions about Terran customs, and noticing the similarities between her people and his. Despite the differences in appearance, language, and culture, there were shared values: respect for life, honor in actions, and the desire to protect others. By evening, Elias suggested a walk along the outer terraces, where the view stretched across valleys, forests, and distant rivers. Lyra agreed, appreciating the quiet moments away from the formal lessons and duties. As they walked, they spoke of fears and hopes. Lyra admitted her initial fear of humans, of being compelled to wed someone so different. Elias listened without judgment, offering his own perspective. He spoke of Terran values, of courage balanced with caution, of trust built through actions rather than words. Lyra realized, with a small, quiet surprise, that she was beginning to feel safe, not just physically, as he had proven during the convoy attack, but emotionally. His calm presence, his respect for her autonomy, and his willingness to understand her world created a space where fear could exist without dominance, where caution could exist without paralysis. When they reached a quiet overlook, the twin moons of Lithoris were rising, their light silver and serene. Lyra leaned against the railing, feeling a strange mix of relief and admiration. "You make it seem easy," she said softly, almost to herself. Elias glanced at her. "I do not make it easy. I try to make it possible. Better." That night, Lyra lay in her chamber, reflecting on the day's events. She had seen Elias in action, not just in the storm, but in the careful thought he put into understanding her world and supporting her choices. She had felt the beginnings of something new, a sense of safety, a recognition that she could rely on him, and the faint stirrings of trust that might, in time, grow into more. She realized that the fear she had carried since childhood was no longer absolute. It had been tempered by experience, softened by understanding, and reshaped by Elias' actions. Humans, she thought, were not simply wild or unpredictable. They could embody courage, wisdom, and care in ways that complemented her own people's values. The thought gave her a quiet hope. Perhaps the future would not be dominated by fear and obligation. Perhaps she could face it with someone she could trust, someone who had shown that strength could be tempered by patience and courage by empathy. As she drifted into sleep, Lyra allowed herself to imagine a future where she did not fear the Terran she had been compelled to wed. Instead, she pictured partnership, understanding, and safety, a sense that together they could navigate the challenges of their worlds. For the first time, she felt that the legends of humans might be incomplete, that fear could give way to respect, and that the bond forming between her and Elias could be more than duty. It could be trust, and perhaps one day something even deeper. The stars of Lithoris shone above, distant yet constant, and Lyra found comfort in their presence. The galaxy remained vast, unpredictable, and full of unknown dangers, but tonight she felt an unspoken assurance that with Elias by her side, she could face whatever came next. And for the first time, Lyra let herself hope, not recklessly, not blindly, but with a careful, cautious heart, that she had found someone whose presence could bring safety, respect, and understanding. The day of the union arrived with a sky painted in shades of gold and crimson. Lithoris was alive with preparation. Courtyards shimmered with banners of every color, intricate patterns woven into the fabric to honor both Veari and Terran traditions. Citizens and diplomats alike moved through the streets with careful purpose, anticipation filling the air like the scent of the native blooms. Lyra rose early, her mind racing. Today, her life would change, but it was no longer only an obligation she feared. The events of the past days, the storm, the convoy attack, the lessons shared, and the quiet moments in the gardens, had reshaped her understanding. She had come to recognize Elias not as a stranger to fear, but as a partner she could rely on, someone whose strength was measured not only in courage, but in patience, intelligence, and respect. Her attendants helped her into the ceremonial robes, soft fabrics flowing with ease over her form. Every fold, every layer was symbolic, representing the values of her people: honor, balance, and wisdom. As she moved through the palace halls, she felt eyes upon her, not just with curiosity, but with expectation. Today would be remembered, not only for the union itself, but for the demonstration of cooperation and unity between two worlds. Elias waited for her at the entrance to the ceremonial chamber. He wore the formal attire of a Terran diplomat, crisp and tailored, yet simple, reflecting his character, unpretentious, composed, and respectful. When his gaze met hers, there was no trace of arrogance, no assumption of dominance, only calm, steady reassurance. "Good morning, Lyra," he said softly, his voice carrying that same warmth that had first begun to ease her fear days ago. "Good morning, Elias," she replied, her voice firmer now, carrying confidence as well as grace. She stepped forward, joining him at the threshold, their hands brushing lightly for an instant, a gesture of acknowledgement, not obligation. The ceremony began. Representatives from the Vayari Council and the Terran delegation gathered to witness the union. Words were spoken in both languages, the cadence and meaning carefully blended. Lyra followed the steps she had practiced, but this time there was no fear, no hesitation. She moved with awareness, guided by knowledge and strengthened by trust. Elias mirrored her movements, his actions deliberate yet natural. He did not seek to overshadow her, nor did he demand attention. He followed her lead when appropriate, and when the moment called for his own guidance, he acted with clarity and respect. Together, they performed the rituals, a synchronized dance of tradition and meaning. As the ceremony progressed, Lyra felt a calm strength settle over her. The fear she had carried from childhood, the fear of humans, of the unknown, had been replaced by a growing sense of partnership. She realized now that the Terran she had once dreaded was no longer a figure of uncertainty. He had shown her courage tempered by wisdom, strength accompanied by care, and a willingness to listen and understand. When the final words were spoken, signaling the formal union, Lyra turned to Elias. His expression was calm, yet his eyes held something deeper: respect, recognition, and something she could only call understanding. She nodded, acknowledging him not as a duty, but as a partner she had chosen, in spirit if not by law, to trust. The crowd erupted in quiet applause, a blend of relief, admiration, and celebration. Lyra and Elias stepped together to the balcony overlooking the city. Below, citizens waved, their faces bright with curiosity and hope. The union was more than personal. It symbolized a bridge between worlds, a promise of cooperation, and a testament to the strength that could arise when two different peoples learned to respect one another. Elias spoke first, his voice carrying across the courtyard. "This union is not only between us," he said, glancing at Lyra, "but between our peoples. May it stand as proof that understanding and respect can overcome fear and uncertainty." Elias had demonstrated all of this, not through words alone, but through actions, through shared experience, and through steadfast respect for her and her people. She stepped forward, her voice steady and clear. "We have learned from each other. We have faced danger together, and we have found trust where fear once lived. May this union remind all of us that courage is not only in strength, but in understanding, patience, and care." She trusted him, not blindly, not without reason, but fully, based on what she had seen, experienced, and understood. After the ceremony, the newly united pair moved through the palace gardens, where celebrations awaited. Music from native instruments mingled with the soft hum of Terran harmonics, creating a unique and harmonious blend. Flowers were offered and gifts exchanged, each symbolizing respect, goodwill, and unity. Lyra watched Elias interact with the Vayari Council members and citizens. He was attentive, patient, and courteous. He did not dominate conversations nor seek to impose his presence. Instead, he engaged genuinely, asking questions about traditions, expressing appreciation for customs, and offering thoughtful suggestions for cooperation between their worlds. She realized that this, more than the ceremony itself, was what made her feel secure and valued. Elias' respect extended not only to her, but to everything she held dear, her people, her culture, and her home. In his actions, she saw the very best of humanity, courage tempered by wisdom, curiosity balanced with empathy, and strength guided by care. As evening approached, Lyra and Elias found a quiet terrace overlooking the city. The twin moons rose, casting a serene silver glow across the palace grounds. They stood side by side, watching the lights of the city reflect in the rivers below. "It feels different now," Lyra said softly, her voice carrying a mixture of wonder and relief. "I feared this union, feared you, but now I feel safe. And you have given me yours, not by obligation, but because you saw who I am." "I trust you," she admitted, her voice quiet but firm. "And I believe in what we can do together." Lyra felt the weight of tradition and duty settle comfortably, not as a burden, but as a foundation upon which something new could grow: friendship, partnership, and perhaps, in time, affection. The celebrations continued below, but for Lyra and Elias, the moment was theirs alone. In the quiet of the terrace, she realized that the galaxy, with all its vastness and uncertainty, was no longer something to fear. With a human like Elias at her side, she felt capable of facing whatever challenges lay ahead. As the night deepened, they walked back into the palace, moving with ease and confidence. Lyra observed him closely, noting the subtle ways he interacted with the world: careful, respectful, intelligent, and aware. She felt admiration, trust, and a quiet warmth that had grown steadily since their first meeting. When they reached her chamber, Lyra paused. She looked at him and smiled softly. "Tomorrow we begin a new chapter," she said. "Not just for us, but for our peoples." Humans were capable of courage, empathy, respect, and understanding. Elias Kane embodied all of these qualities. She had come to feel safe, not because the world had changed, but because she had learned to trust, and because she had found a human who demonstrated through every action that he could be relied upon. The twin moons shone outside her window, casting silver light across the room. Lyra closed her eyes, allowing herself to rest, to hope, and to imagine the future. The galaxy was vast, unpredictable, and full of challenges, but tonight she felt a sense of assurance she had never known. Tomorrow would bring new duties, new encounters, and new opportunities to strengthen the bond between their worlds. But tonight she was not afraid. She was not burdened. She was filled with quiet confidence, knowing that the Terran she had once feared had become someone she could trust, someone who had proven himself a partner, a protector, and a bridge between their worlds. And in that moment, Lyra understood the truth of the legends that had been whispered about humans, that they were not merely conquerors or brutes, but beings capable of profound courage, wisdom, and empathy. She had seen it firsthand. She had lived it, and she had come to know that she could rely on it and on him completely.